The Korean War forgotten but crucial. Often overshadowed by World War II and the Vietnam War, the Korean War, 1950–1953, holds a crucial yet underrated place in the annals of modern history. Known as the Forgotten War, its impact on geopolitics, military strategies, and human lives was profound, defining the trajectory of the Cold War and reshaping international relations permanently. While it remains a less discussed event, the Korean War is a striking reminder of the consequences of ideological conflicts and fragile diplomacy. This video uncovers the roots of the Korean War, delves into its major turning points, and highlights its lasting global relevance. Let us journey into this pivotal conflict to uncover why it must not be forgotten. The seeds of the Korean War were planted during the Japanese occupation of Korea from 1910 to 1945. For decades, the Korean peninsula was under Japanese rule until the end of World War II, when Japan's defeat led to its liberation. However, the question of Korea's future immediately became a battleground for Cold War tensions. In 1945, the Allies agreed to temporarily divide Korea into two zones along the 38th parallel. The northern zone was occupied by Soviet forces, while the southern zone came under US administration. This division, initially meant as a short-term measure, became permanent as competing ideologies. Communism in the north and democracy in the south took hold under differing political regimes. By the late 1940s, tensions escalated. The Soviet-backed North Korean government, led by Kim Il-sung, sought to unite the peninsula under communist rule. Meanwhile, the US-supported South, under Syngman Rhee, hoped for a democratic Korea. Diplomatic efforts failed as no agreement on reunification could be reached, and border clashes became increasingly frequent. On June 25, 1950, the Korean peninsula erupted into full-scale war. North Korean forces unleashed a surprise invasion, pushing their way across the 38th parallel into South Korean territory. Within days, the North's well-trained and Soviet-equipped army captured key cities, forcing South Korean troops and civilians into a desperate retreat. The international community responded quickly. Framing the invasion as a threat to global peace and democracy, the United Nations called for immediate military assistance to South Korea. A coalition of 16 nations, led primarily by the United States, intervened under the UN banner. Notably, this was the first major armed conflict of the Cold War, and it became evident that Korea would serve as a proxy battleground in the ideological war between East and West. More than just a regional conflict, the Korean War epitomized the growing divide between communism and democracy in a world increasingly shaped by the Cold War. The involvement of global powers transformed Korea into a chessboard for ideological supremacy. The Soviet Union supported North Korea with weapons, training, and resources, though it avoided direct military confrontation. Meanwhile, the United States mobilized its military to defend South Korea, seeing the conflict as a test of its commitment to containing communist expansion worldwide. This war also marked China's dramatic entry into global affairs. Alarmed by US advances near its border, China's People's Volunteer Army entered the war in late 1950, reshaping the conflict into a vicious and prolonged struggle. Despite its early triumphs, North Korea's advances were halted through one of the most daring counteroffensives in military history. In September 1950, US General Douglas MacArthur orchestrated the Incheon Landing, a surprise amphibious assault far behind North Korean lines. This bold operation turned the tide of the war, forcing North Korean troops to retreat and pushing UN forces northward toward the Yalu River on China's border. However, this success was short-lived. Alarmed by the threat of US forces near its frontier, China launched a massive counteroffensive with hundreds of thousands of troops in October 1950. The sudden entry of the Chinese army overwhelmed UN forces, rolling them back across the 38th parallel. What followed was 2 years of grueling back-and-forth battles, marked by heavy casualties on both sides. By 1951, the war settled into a brutal stalemate along the 38th parallel, resembling the trench warfare of World War I. The fighting became a war of attrition, with neither side willing to concede defeat. For soldiers on the ground, conditions were harrowing. Freezing winters, relentless artillery fire, and horrific injuries became a daily reality. The Korean War was a catastrophe for both soldiers and civilians. Over 1 million Koreans, including countless innocents, lost their lives in the crossfire. Civilians were caught in the horrors of occupation, bombings, and mass displacement as entire villages were destroyed. For foreign troops, particularly the UN forces led by the United States, the war was marked by grueling conditions and high casualty rates. Over 36,000 American soldiers died, while Allied nations also paid a heavy price. The personal testimonies of veterans often emphasized the relentless violence and emotional scars that remained long after the armistice. The Korean Peninsula was devastated by the war's destruction, with infrastructure in shambles and millions rendered homeless. The long-term psychological and social impact on the Korean people, both in the North and South, was immeasurable, a deeply divided nation emerging from the ashes of war. After 3 years of intense fighting, the Korean War ended not in victory, but in stalemate. On July 27, 1953, both sides signed the Korean Armistice Agreement, effectively halting hostilities but failing to secure a lasting peace. The 38th parallel became the Demilitarized Zone, DMZ, a heavily fortified border that endures to this day. The war left the Korean Peninsula divided, with North Korea remaining a reclusive communist state under the Kim regime and South Korea evolving into a vibrant democratic society. Tensions persisted between the two Koreas, and the armistice ensured that the conflict technically never ended, as no peace treaty was signed. The Korean War shaped the modern global order in profound ways. For the United States, it cemented its policy of containment, reaffirming its commitment to combating communism worldwide. The war also strained US-China relations, creating a distrust that persists to this day. For the Korean people, the war entrenched a painful division that continues to define life on the peninsula. North Korea remains isolated and militarized, while South Korea has become an economic powerhouse and key US ally. The DMZ, a symbol of the war's unresolved legacy, highlights the ongoing tensions between these two drastically different nations. The war's lessons extend far beyond Korea. It underscored the dangers of ideological conflicts escalating into physical wars, testing the resolve of international coalitions, and revealing the devastating human cost of geopolitical rivalries. Despite its far-reaching consequences, the Korean War is often overshadowed by World War II and the Vietnam War in public memory. Historians cite several reasons for this. First, it lacked the sweeping victories and moral clarity of World War II, making it less celebrated. Second, it ended in a stalemate, leaving no clear winner to solidify its legacy. Lastly, the generation of soldiers who fought in Korea were often overlooked or forgotten, as attention shifted to the more controversial Vietnam War in the 1960s and 70s. The Korean War remains a poignant chapter in history. It reminds us of the consequences of ideological rigidity and the human cost of unresolved political divides. From the global stakes of the Cold War to the personal stories of those who endured its hardships, the Korean War serves as both a cautionary tale and a call for better diplomacy. Today, as tensions on the Korean Peninsula persist, the lessons of the Korean War remain relevant. The fragile peace established in 1953 stands as a reminder of the need for ongoing efforts in conflict resolution and international cooperation. The Korean War, though often overlooked, is a conflict that we cannot afford to forget. Its lessons resonate across time, about the costs of war, the resilience of people, and the need to prevent history from repeating itself. As we reflect on this pivotal event, let it guide our understanding of today's global challenges. The forgotten war deserves to be remembered. By looking back, we honour those who sacrificed everything and ensure that future generations understand the weight of choices made on the battlefield of ideology, diplomacy, and humanity. Please like and subscribe for more historical content.